All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another Future Focused weekly update. I'm your host, Christopher Lind, and if I am doing my job well, hopefully I'm keeping you 10 steps ahead of what's going on at the intersection of business, people, and tech. We're coming into a holiday weekend. I actually wasn't going to do an episode this week, and then I had a couple things. I thought I'd do a little bit of a different flavor of one, so I'll describe what that is. But before we get into it, thanks to all of you who watch, listen, the messages I get. I truly appreciate it. And it's an encouragement to me when I hear things from you, even the criticism I appreciate because it continues to challenge me, but it's good to know that what I'm doing is at least being received and helping some folks out. So if you enjoy it, if you appreciate it, please share, like, subscribe, follow, all those good things. It just helps me out, helps get the message out. And if you are so compelled, and you'd say, boy, if I could, I would love to take Christopher out for a virtual coffee or for a coffee or lunch. You can do that. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/Christopher Lind and you can say, hey, thanks, with a financial nod. And it just helps me pay for some of the tech and the tools that I use to keep this thing running. But totally up to you. So let's talk about what I'm going to do for this week, because it is a little bit, this is more of a public service announcement episode than anything else. There was a series of articles I came across and just conversations in general I've been having recently. So I thought, as we're celebrating Labor Day here in the US, and just kind of thinking about work and where everything's going, there's just some concerning trends I'm seeing that I wanted to speak to and just address head on, because I get where they're coming from, but I want to give some additional perspective based on the vantage point I'm in to just hopefully help curb some of this, because I just don't want to see people get hurt because they're making short-term decisions based on what they think. So the first one has to do with some really, really risky decisions people are making because of what they think about where AI is going. And then the other one has to do with a statement put out by one of Google's GenAI execs, their top leaders, about preparing for the future and some, in my opinion, terrible advice that he's giving. So it's just going to be a shorter 2-part one on this. And then we're going to get ready for the weekend. So let's get started. So the first two articles that actually inspired this first point of, oh no, please folks, don't go for this, is I came across a futurism article that was talking about an MIT student that dropped out, completely abandoned their program. And it just has to do with the fact were fully convinced that they're so anxious about AI. They're convinced we're not even going to be around by the time this person would have graduated. They just said, what's even the point? So I'm just going to quit and just go live my life for the next few years before, rather than stay in a grad program. And then the other one was, so there, I get people might write that off and go, well, that's just a young person who doesn't understand life, freaking out about things and doing that. Okay, you can write that one off as this. But then the other one was a bunch of AI experts recently have been coming online talking about how there's this big trend now that AI experts are stopping saving for retirement. They're kind of like cashing out 401ks and doing all this stuff because they are fully anticipating the machines to kill us. Now, you might go, man, Christopher, Labor Day weekend, we're supposed to be celebrating. This is kind of a dark topic. I'm including it because I want to do a public service announcement to hopefully say, please don't make these kinds of decisions because they're becoming more and more popular. And this trend is growing. And in some ways, it reminds me a little bit of back when Y2K, if you don't remember the Y2K bug, I was just graduating high school around that time. And I mean, I remember like people were convinced the end of the world was here. And that's a little bit more and more what we're seeing with folks. People are convinced the end is near. We got a few years left. And I actually did a panel last week where that was a question that I got. Christopher, I've read some of this stuff. Do you really think the AGI, the predictions for 2027, 2030, are they viable? And I understand where people are coming from. And if you want my honest answer, I think there are possibilities. There are very credible, viable reasons why some of these things that people are rightfully freaking out about could happen. I get it. And, so if you're somebody who just completely writes it off as that's poppycock, like that's just nonsense. Well, I don't think that's the right approach to take, because you might find yourself blindsided, maybe not by the AI apocalypse, but just some extremely dramatic changes. Whether AI wipes out all of humanity or not is kind of irrelevant, because whatever happens in the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to be dramatically different. The world is going to look dramatically different. And so if you're somebody who just goes, I think this apocalypse stuff is nonsense, you run the risk of writing off all of the change that's coming, because you just kind of decide everything's going to be just fine. And yeah, I firmly believe everything's going to be just fine. It's just a matter of what's your definition of just fine. So if you're somebody who's writing these things off, you think it's nonsense and just people have lost their minds, I would challenge you to go, well, take it a little more seriously than that, or you might end up getting really wounded in the process, if not completely wiped out. But, okay, here's the but. Here's the encouraging, conclusion as we come into Labor Day. I actually don't think it's helpful to get so wrapped up in the, apocalyptic doomsday, this is the end is near. This is the end of all humanity. It's the end of all human labor. It's the da-da-da-da-da. Because when you start believing that, you start making really risky, dangerous mistakes, and unnecessarily. And I say unnecessarily because we don't know what the future holds. And anybody who says they do is lying. They're lying. Like, it doesn't matter if you're one of the top execs or highest political leader in the world and you think you've got everything under your thumb and can control it. You don't. You don't know where this is going. There are an infinite number of factors that could influence things. AI could suddenly implode on itself and like the whole thing could blow up. I don't think that's what's going to happen. But right, like, you don't know. And so if you make extreme decisions like I'm not going to save for retirement, or I'm going to drop out of school, or whatever, I do feel like you are assuming how this stuff is going to play out, and you don't. And let's just look at human history. I mean, I commented on the the Y2K thing. I mean, I know people who liquidated their life savings and did all this stuff, and then we all woke up on January 1st, 2001 or 2000, and it was like, everything. We had a few minor little hiccups here and there, and like that was it. And I know people who really, really, really suffered greatly. And so some of these people who are making massive decisions, like long-term massive decisions based on an assumption. And granted, you can say, oh, it's a data-backed assumption. Oh, okay, right. But even that, like, it's not guaranteed. And it's not, I wouldn't even say there's a high 60, 70% chance this is the way it goes. There's so much. And the people who are in this space, except the ones that have totally bought into this, will acknowledge, well, we don't know. And honestly, even some of these folks they're making these decisions. They're like, I mean, technically we don't know. But what a lot of people don't know is a lot of these people have the resources that they can do this. And if it doesn't play out, they'll be just fine. But unfortunately, that leads a lot of people who aren't in that position to follow suit. And when this blows up, they can't just like, oh, well, I guess I'll just take all the gold bullion that I put in my basement and then cash it in and put it back in the bank, right? There's a lot of people who end up making really big mistakes. And I think about the students. I mean, I talked to a fair amount of college students who are like, is it even worth it to go to college anymore? Because there's not even going to be any jobs in, this field in the next 3. And it's like, stop. Don't make those kind of decisions. Now, if I were to talk to the MIT student and they said, I actually hated the program, I didn't want to be here, and I just did it because this is always what I was told to do, and like with all the improbability and uncertainty around where things are going, look, I just decided, like, why am I committing myself to this kind of student debt and this kind of life for the next 3 years? And they understand and are thinking about this truly because this isn't what I want to do, and maybe the world ends in 3 years and maybe it doesn't, but either way, I wouldn't want to walk this path. That's a very different story than I am in my dream school. I got my scholarship to my dream college. I'm pursuing a field that I care deeply about and want to, do for the rest of my life. And I'm throwing it all away because I have bought into the narrative of AI 2027 and I don't think we're going to be around anyway. That's where I go, oh, don't do that. Like, look, if you decide, you know what, I've been on the corporate machine for way too long. I'm burned out. I'm throwing myself into everything. And there seems to be enough uncertainty. Like maybe this is the thing that makes you think twice about, is all this work I'm just pouring into, what's it really leading to? Like, I don't even see my family anymore. Maybe given the fear or concern about where things will be in 3 to 5 years, maybe I do back off a little bit and maybe spend a little more time. Maybe instead of socking away for what I think I'm going to need in 20 years, I don't know, I take my family on a vacation. Like if you've got a healthy attitude, I actually think that can be a good thing. And I hope some of the uncertainty around the AI stuff actually does push people to take a look at their life and go, look, hypothetically, let's say this whole game is over in 3 to 5 years. Would you be making the same decisions you're making today if that were the case? But the unfortunate part is, it shouldn't take a potential AI apocalypse for us to have to do that. Because the reality is, put AI stuff off the table, put that stuff over here and say, all right, let's pretend that didn't exist. There are so many, an infinite number of other factors that could wipe humanity off the face of the planet before 2030. That we just take for granted. We take for granted that some space rock's not going to come like boom, that some hacker is not going to hack all the nuclear silos and set them off. There are infinite number of possibilities. Never mind the fact that I grew up in a funeral home. Let me tell you, most people don't make it as long as they planned in life. And many people tragically don't wake up the next morning and they were convinced they had another 30 years type of a thing. So while I recognize and in some ways appreciate the fact that this AI thing is stirring people a little bit to look in the mirror and go, are the things that I am pouring myself into just so much and am, laying aside everything else to chase these things and, running all this stuff and, missing out on so much of life. Like there's a part of me that's like, good. I hope, if it takes a potential AI apocalypse to get you to say, man, maybe I take a second look at my life and pause. Like, okay, in a healthy sense, sure. In a dangerous, risky sense, where if you're making decisions today based on what you're afraid of might happen in 3 to 5 years, that in 3 to 5 years, if none of those things come to fruition, you're cooked because you burned through all of your savings, you quit your, really solid job and you went and traveled the world and like, okay, now you saw the world and now you got a 3-year gap on your resume and you're way behind the times because you were off walking through the mountains, whatever. And then you come back and go, well, I have no real tangible job skills. Now what do I do? Like, it's about balance. It's about like recognizing you don't control most of this stuff. Actually, you pretty much control nothing. So as you come into Labor Day, I actually think these stories should at least be one that makes all of us stop and look in the mirror and think for a second and actually ask ourselves, like, all right, like, where am I committing my time? Where am I committing my energy? Are the things that I'm doing things that, if I were to look back on, would I say this is the best use of my time? Am I locked into things that I'm only doing because I feel like I have to? And just for the record, this is something I do on the regular. And maybe some of it's just because I grew up in a funeral home. But this is something I do on the regular where I look at everything, including this podcast, including my writing on Substack, including all this other stuff where I go, is this something that, I'm only doing because I feel obligated to, and I feel like I'm supposed to, or, it's good for my career, or what I'm building as a business, is it just the mundane, trivial stuff that, quite frankly, my time would be better spent with other things? And I examine that on the regular basis and evaluate that. And at some point, you might one day just all of a sudden, I'm not creating more content. I don't know. There's times where all of a sudden I'll go like a few weeks where I don't. And it's just because, nope, you know what? I thought about it and I just need to take a little bit of a breather. And this was one where I was planning on this week. And then I had a little time and I'm like, I'll just do a public service announcement because this is something that clearly everybody else is struggling with. So I don't say this to you as like, you should do it. This is something that I've found is extremely healthy for me to do on a regular basis, to do this in community with my wife and my kids, and to talk about, hey, like, what are we doing? Where are we going? What are we thinking about? Are there things that we should maybe think differently about, or tweaks we might want to make? Like, it's part of our routine. And I'll admit, it's not always fun to look in the mirror and go, have I kind of started drifting? But what I can say is if you do it on the regular, the drift is much smaller. You catch these things before you go too far off the path. You don't find yourself 20 years into something and you go, how did I get here? And why on earth was I doing this for 20 years when there was no purpose to it? You might go a few months and be like, man, why am I doing this? But you're not going to go years and decades. And so I think, if anything, whether you're worried about an AI apocalypse, whether you're, concerned about climate change and what the future of the environment may hold, if you're worried about what may happen with the economics of things, or where things may go from a geopolitical standpoint, like whatever. I mean, there's lots of stuff that's weighing on everybody's head, but there's also very personal stuff. So like whatever is going on, it's worth taking the time to pause and look at things and go, if tomorrow wasn't going to come, is what my schedule looks like, are my time commitments, my financial investments, all these things, like, are they the things that I think are the best choice? And also make that while holding intention, but I may live for another 40, 50 years. So I better not make any really, really rash, stupid decisions that, are going to completely send me off course. And so I would encourage you, I know that's not a fun exercise to do, especially if you're unfamiliar with it, but more and more, I think some of these extreme cases come from people who aren't doing this on the regular, and so all of a sudden you're faced with this big, frightening thing, and you kind of start looking around and you've never done it before. And suddenly, like, you just have no grounding. You feel completely awash. And so you make a rash decision, like dropping out of MIT in the middle of your program, or completely liquidating all of your finances and blowing it on all the things that are going to make you happy. And then you get to the other side and go, wow, that was stupid. And then you end up spending a bunch of time cleaning up the mess. And I just don't want to see people do that. So please don't. Just use this as an opportunity to think about it, evaluate your calendar, evaluate your schedule. Make sure it's things that you truly feel are adding value and worth your time, but also that if you're going to make changes, there aren't long-term consequences or implications that you're not taking into consideration, and that you don't have at least some semblance of a plan for how you would work out if it doesn't go that way. So I just don't need any more statistics feeding into these things. All right. So then the other one, the second one, was the founder of Google's generative AI team. Okay. He's on record now, and he's out there telling all these, I don't even know that they're young people because these degrees are ones, but anyway, he's out there telling everybody, like, don't even bother getting a law degree or a medical degree or, any of these advanced degrees, because AI is basically going to destroy all these jobs long before you can either, before you can even get a degree. And, his kind of clarifying statement was, either focus on something super, super, super niche, like, and of his example, like AI for biology. So basically, either only go for something that's hyper specialized in the field of AI, or don't do anything at all. And I read this article and I was like, this is the most reckless advice. I mean, I'd expect this from somebody who's like 21. The dude's like 42 and he's got enough time under his, but it shows just some of the disconnect behind this. So I know, once again, this is the kind of like noise and panic and all this other stuff that's out there that leads to decisions like this MIT student taking this advice and going, yeah, I was going to get an advanced degree in engineering. And now, you know what? AI is going to do engineering anyway. So screw it. I'm going to go back to waiting tables. Or, I mean, I don't know. I don't know the story of what the student did. But my point is, this isn't so much a add on to the first point of like, think carefully. This is a point I want to make about what I'm actually seeing based on some research that I'll talk about next week from MIT, ironically, about where AI is going. Some of the things that I also talk about where some of the models are going next week, or I have it planned to talk about those. Some of these other things. This idea that AI is just going to completely wipe out things like a law or medical degree or the need for it. It just doesn't hold water. That's the thing. These kinds of statements are always made by somebody who does not understand the thing they're talking about, and is looking at it from across the river and going, yeah, I don't really think we're going to need that. I'm pretty sure AI can do that. And it can't. And it's a misunderstanding of what people assume a lawyer or a doctor does, or what a law program or a degree does. Now, do I think that there's going to be a need for academic institutions to radically change the way that they do it? Yes. Do I think there's opportunity for companies to maybe say, what if we built our own internal, basically apprenticeship in this kind of stuff? I guess maybe, but what many people, especially when, like, the fact he said this about lawyers and doctors, I'm like, you realize there's actual board certifications and tests and things like that. Like, you can't just practice law because AI is helping you know what to do. You can't just counsel somebody and diagnose and treat somebody's cancer because it's a passion project for you and you have an AI agent helping support. Like, these things are highly regulated. To me, this was just some of the most ridiculous advice I'd ever seen. So first of all, one, don't buy it. Second, yes, things are going to change. Like I said in my previous point, the world is going to look radically different in the next. More and more, I'm questioning whether it's going to happen as much as a lot of the predictions are happening. But in the next, decade, for sure, I think things are going to radically look very, very, very different. However, let me just give you some practical insight into a lot of the advisory and consulting work I'm doing right now. What I can tell you is companies that are betting on AI to just take care of the things people do are floundering. I mean, it's going really bad, just to be completely honest with where things are at. People grossly underestimate what actually goes into work. The way workflows happen is spread across multiple systems, multiple data sets, different teams, different decision makers. There's egos involved. Like, there's all this stuff that is just adding complexity to it. So even if hypothetically you were in complete isolation, you could throw AI at one of these things. It might be able to do a percentage of the job. You might be able to get it to do a part of it, but it probably wouldn't even do that very well. It's just a good example from like law. Even if you just trained AI to do nothing but do your legal research, there's already cases of lawyers and law firms that are getting in big trouble for overdependence on AI because it's not as flawless. And I think that's only going to become more apparent as the reality of how flawed and broken AI is just becomes more pronounced. Right now, many people are still kind of buying into this idea that AI is flawless. It doesn't make mistakes. It can just kind of take things and run with them and be okay. And many people don't even understand the work they're asking it to do. And they're just assuming because AI is so smart, it'll figure it out. Sadly, because we've been like spoiled with people I mean, in some ways, you kind of can do that with a person. You can kind of go, here you go, like, good luck. And a person will figure it out without any real direction. Not saying that's wise or that's a good approach, but it's actually, so then you hear stories like, well, AI can just do this on its own with no problems whatsoever. Not quite. And the outcomes it gets to are often not aligned at all to what people would actually want it to be aligned to. I think that's one of the biggest misses is it's an alien intelligence. The things it values and prioritizes and cares about are not the same things we do. And so it doesn't hold water. Now, even practically speaking, okay, let me talk practically here, because I've spent a lot of time in the HR space. And so I've been around job ads and, what it takes when you have an opening and how do you find somebody and all this other stuff. You talk to any company and go, how's that going? Because for I don't know how long, people have been saying the college degree does not prepare people for the workforce and it is therefore no longer valid and we're going to do away with the college. Do you know how long that has been being said? A long time. Go ask any company how many jobs they've removed degrees from their requirements. Not very many. There's a hint for you. Not very many. And even the ones that they do, guess who they will choose as a candidate if given the option of one with a degree versus one without a degree? Yeah, you can probably guess. There still is, and this goes back to why a lot of this transformation stuff is still extremely human. Why? Because people are biased towards people with advanced degrees. They assume, even though they publicly will say a degree doesn't actually teach people what they need to know to be successful and da-da-da-da-da. It's like, well, then how come everybody on your team comes from your alma mater and also has an advanced degree? Well, that's your response. Like, come on, just at least acknowledge you feel more comfortable. You need these indicators that make you feel. So to me, this is reckless. Telling people don't go get it. Why? So you even further thin the talent pool? Like, what kind of ridiculous advice is this? So, but going back to my previous point. Okay, so, well, hang on. Before I do, let me just say this. Companies are not going to eliminate degree programs from their requirements anytime soon. I honestly, as slow as everything's moving, I have more hope in academic institutions updating their curriculum and updating the way they prepare people for the future faster than bloated corporate organizations changing their requirements for degree programs. I mean, for Pete's sakes, we had 4 years of just like incredible productivity with remote work. And what are we doing now? We got CEOs dragging people back into the office, kicking and screaming as productivity and engagement numbers plummet. And we're like, yeah, but I can see people, so I know that's better. So let's not underestimate the power of human foolishness when it comes to some of this stuff. And like I talked to a lot of higher education institutions that are making dramatic efforts to improve and update and modernize and change the way their degree programs are. Does that mean everybody should go get a degree? No. I think largely there was this huge push where like everybody had to get a degree. I think that was kind of stupid. We moved away from kind of a more balanced sphere. And so, yeah, I mean, should you think twice about getting a degree? Well, of course. Should you get a degree just because you think that's what you should do? No, not necessarily. Like, explore the trades, explore other fields. I mean, there's going to be a lot of things. AI is definitely coming slower for some of these. The one thing he said that I do agree with is something more niched could be more durable. But I also think you got to be careful of going too niche, because the thing about the age of AI, and that's where I thought it was really ironic that he says, go super niche, but get away from these big degree programs. It's like, so you're saying things are going to move so fast that we're not even going to be able to keep up, yet you're telling people to get hyper specialized in one very specific area. That also seems to contradict itself. So I would say, yeah, like specialize in something that you really are deeply passionate about and get really good at it. But you also got to be able to balance that portfolio with a diverse suite of experiences and expertises. So, to those of you who may be, weighing in, do I go back and get a degree? Do I encourage my kids to get a degree? Do I, whatever? I honestly feel like it's the wrong question to be asking. I feel like we often just jump to the should I get a degree? Should I not get a degree? Instead of really asking the question, what am I really trying to accomplish? And what role would a degree potentially play in accomplishing that? And what are the risks or trade offs of me not taking that path? And I think if you approach it more from that lens, then you can weigh your options, and then you also have a plan if things don't go quite according to plan. I mean, right now I have my undergrad and graduate degree. So some people might say, well, Christopher, you're just biased because you have 2 degrees. I guess, but I didn't get my degrees because, well, I got my first degree because that's what you had to do. But anyway, it's not about degrees or not degrees. And I think that's my biggest point. And so, if you're somebody who's afraid that if you don't go back and get your MBA, or you don't follow through on your undergrad, you're going to fail. No, yeah, you're going to have some challenges because those kinds of things can, get in your way depending on what you want to do as a career path. But if you're somebody who's also like, yeah, we're never going to need degrees, so I'm just going to pursue my dreams, like, well, that might also not bode well for you. So I think it's just more about like, hey, folks, like, things in some ways are changing ridiculously fast, and in others, they're changing slower than a snail's pace. So I would say, take the time to understand what you're trying to do, what the things and factors you're taking into consideration are, and what the risks are if things don't go according to plan. And then ultimately recognize, well, no matter what you decide, you don't control the future and you don't know the outcome. So just always be preparing yourself for the unexpected, because no matter how prepared you think you are or how much you think you know about the future or where things are going, you're never holding all the cards. So lots of food for thought as you go into Labor Day. And hopefully it balances comfort with a little bit of urgency behind it, while at the same time giving you something to think about. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful long holiday weekend. I'll be back next week. I've got some important topics that I'll cover on that. And if you need help navigating this stuff, if you need to try and figure out how to make sense of this on a more personalized level than I can give you as you listen to my general kind of perspective and counsel from a 100,000-foot view, reach out. I love working with people on this. So with that, hope you have a great one, and we will see you on the other side.